freedom, pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this great and wonderful land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we face, and it is plaguing much of the world and is responsible for so many of our problems. It impacts just about every area of our daily lives, and this is what I have spent my professional career dealing with and writing about in my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, the international bestseller, and perhaps the definitive work on understanding manipulative personality types, now published in over 14 foreign languages, and soon, hopefully, to be even one more. I should have an announcement about that fairly soon. Also, my book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, the in-depth study of all the disturbed characters you'll likely encounter in your life, those folks that make you crazy, the folks that make your life miserable, the folks that have you scratching your head, wondering what in the heck are they thinking? What makes them tick? And then lastly, my book for the Christian faith community, The Judas Syndrome, about how our genuine faith can really save us from our baser selves. But this is not a faith of words. It's a faith of action. It's a faith that is revealed in how we conduct our lives. And I also have some new books that will be coming out, one of which we have a title for, How Did We End Up Here? And that should be out at the first of the year. I'll have more information about that for you. And there will be another follow-up to that, hopefully in the late spring. We haven't titled that just yet. But I've got 2 new books on the horizon. I'll have more information for you as time goes on. Be doing some professional workshops next year, and then the year after that, some public workshops. So I'll have word for you on that as time goes on as well. And then also, I have the information that so many of you have come to regard as a helpful support in your dealings with the character disturbed people in your life at my blog at manipulative-people.com. That's www.manipulative-people.com. where I have hundreds of timely articles that you can peruse that'll give you information about how to understand and deal with the most difficult folks in your life, and especially how to get the help you need to deal with these problems. And lastly, I also write for another blog called Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life, a blog based in the United Kingdom, a good resource. I have hundreds of articles there, too, that you can access at www.counselingwith2lsresource.com. That's counselingwith2lsresource.com. Well, tonight's program is going to be, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because it troubles me so greatly when events like have transpired over the past week occur. The tragedy in France with another coordinated terrorist attack. So it troubles me that I need to do this once again, but we're going to revisit some issues that I've visited time and time again, it seems like, on this program, but can't be emphasized enough. So we've got some things to talk about that bear upon what kinds of individuals think and behave in these manners. And it should be a discussion that several folks will be interested in participating in, I hope. And if you want to join the conversation, if you have some thoughts on the tragedy and the reasons for it, and you want to join the conversation, the number to call is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Well, I, like most folks, felt a little bit of my heart drop once again. Your heart just sinks every time you have to pick up the paper or turn on the TV or hear the news of another senseless act of violence. When I was first getting into the professional practice of dealing with folks with character disturbance and just beginning to collect data, clinical data, for my first book, In Sheep's Clothing, I came to realize something very interesting about the field of psychology, especially the way most clinicians were classically trained. If I had to oversimplify just a little bit, I would say that the traditional psychology of the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, the traditional psychology was a fear-based psychology. In other words, psychology seemed to concern itself an awful lot with what goes wrong with folks when they're overly anxious or overly afraid, when they're running from things, maybe some things that they have repressed because they're so painful, and therefore they've even lost touch with what they're running from. But basically, psychology was a fear-based psychology. What goes wrong with people when they're overly afraid, when they're riddled with fears and insecurities that hamper them, that stymie them, that get in their way? And what I came to realize very early on is that we didn't have a very good psychology that took into account not so much people's fears and the way they run from things, but people's aggressive instincts and the kinds of fighting they do. And I came also to realize that most of human life, 99.99% of it, is not about running at all. It's about fighting in some way. We do an awful lot more of that in one way or another in our daily lives than we do anything else. And I realized that we did not have a psychology of that. As a matter of fact, when I looked at classical psychology paradigms, what I realized is that almost every single theory that tried to explain why we aggress postulated in some way that we only do it when we're afraid. In other words, we lash out defensively, was the classical thinking. Only when, quote unquote, threatened do we fight. It's part of our basic fight or flight response. At least that was the classical thinking. And then I encountered for the first time and then started reading about and getting some validating information about folks who I was encountering who seemed to fight in untoward ways and unscrupulous ways, sometimes in covert ways, which is what led me to write my first book, and for no good reason. Many times they weren't, quote unquote, threatened at all. They just wanted their way. They just wanted to impose their way on others. They just wanted to have what they wanted to have. And they wanted everyone else to cave in to their demands. And sometimes, very covertly, they would go about their sneaky little ways of getting what they wanted. And I started to make a list of the tactics that these unscrupulous fighters used. And then I realized that these tactics were very successful manipulation tactics. That folks using these tactics knew how to get the better of conscientious people. But more than anything else, it made me realize how short-sighted most of our psychology paradigms were. They couldn't deal, and they couldn't adequately explain this basic human instinct in us all that's been with us since the beginning. This will to power. This will to have what we will have. And to get everyone else to capitulate. It's in us all to a greater or lesser degree. And it's been the source of many a conflict. Now, throughout human history, we have fought wars for various reasons. I'm talking about the human race has. Sometimes it's been over property, purely and simple. Sometimes it's been over resources. But something even more insidious than that has cropped up in recent years. We got our first taste of it. We got our first taste of it with the rise of the great empires. And then we got another, more recent, horrendous taste of it with the rise of the Nazi ideology, the Aryan supremacy ideology that preceded World War II. And the insidious ideology is this, that if anyone doesn't believe my way or see the world as I want to see it, and if everyone doesn't accede to that, then they're expendable. And this is an ideology that has taken deep root within a certain segment of a so-called religiously based community. Now, I know that many people believe that religion itself is the problem. There are some folks who have so had it with the fact that throughout history so many wars and so many unthinkable things have been done in the name of religion. That they have just written off all religion as evil constructs in themselves. I know that's true. And I know how tempting that is. In many ways. In many ways. I do not blame folks for having such a bitter taste when it comes to some of our religious ideology. But some of these systems of belief have captured within them some of the most eternal and some of the most beautiful truths about life. And there are those among us who are attracted to these systems of belief of one type or another precisely because of the beautiful, timeless things that they speak to. And they have used these systems of belief to not only better their own lives, but also to better the lives of others. So I'm not so sure that inherently any of these systems of belief are evil. So I'm not one of them to just say, well, to heck with all religions, because they're nothing but trouble. But in addition to the timeless truths, and in addition to the vehicles for personal growth and development, and for human relations building that so many of these ideologies and systems of belief have built into them, there are also some disturbing, truly disturbing, and problematic aspects of them all that can be used to justify the most heinous acts. And we're witnessing that on a large scale today. And it threatens us all. This is not going to get better anytime soon. And it is bound to get worse. And how we respond to it, is going to make a lot of difference. I know that you all have feelings about this, and I'm certainly open to hearing from anyone about their thoughts about this, but I'm going to say some very challenging things tonight during the program. Some very challenging things. You know, Pope Francis said something today that I commend him for. He said that to use in any way the name of God, to invoke that name, to justify any of the kinds of heinous acts that we have seen recently is blasphemy. He called it out. Every single religious ideology has a concept akin to blasphemy. It's basically when you profane the highest ideals, supposedly, of the ideology, when you basically trash the most sacred, when you debase the holy. And so what he had to say, I think, is a real challenge and is spot on. But these crazy militants, well, they're not crazy. These psychopathic militants who would invoke the name of God or Allah to justify the heinous acts that they commit, they are, without question, blasphemers. And I certainly urge peace-loving and God-fearing adherence to any religion to call that out, to call that blasphemy out for what it is. In a moment, I'll have some other even more challenging words, but I want to invite once again anyone listening tonight who wants to join this conversation to give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. I hear from folks all the time who contact me through the blog or through my personal email or who write me. I hear from folks all the time who have told me of their various struggles trying to find a spirituality, because so many of us need that, crave that kind of naturally, but have had such a difficult time with various organized religions and the kinds of things that are preached that only divide and that only misguide as opposed to unite and help prosper the human race. It's a shame. But it's more than a shame. It's blasphemy. To invoke what you purport to be holy, to justify the evil that resides in your heart, the hate that is there, is the greatest evil. It's not just what we call sin. Sin, its actual meaning, is a falling short. It's a missing the mark. It's a failure to rise to the level that we're capable of. And what I'm talking about here is more than just missing the mark. To invoke all that is holy as justification for hateful, cold-blooded murder is blasphemy, and it is the ultimate evil. One of the reasons it's the ultimate evil, all evil at root is a lie. The lie we tell ourselves are behind all of the evil that we do. There are some religious metaphors that consider the devil, or whatever entity you want to see as the source of evil, as the quote-unquote father of lies. The evil is always in the lie. And what some of the cold-hearted among us will lie mostly about is the truth of their motivation. They will say that they're trying to purify the world, when the truth, and they actually know the truth. There's no worse lie than lying to oneself. When the truth, the simple truth, is that they have this urge to dominate, to bring all others into submission, to make all others subordinate to their will and their rule. It's still part of our evolutionary makeup. It's instilled within us. Not facing that fact and not realizing that if we're going to survive, we have to rise above it, is the source of so many of our problems. And if we don't successfully confront this beast and deal with it directly, we will perish. This problem is not going away. And, it doesn't take much thought to understand why it's not going away. This is not rocket science. We live in a world where our ability to network and our knowledge about things that can destroy has reached a level where even small, relatively insignificant bands of twisted thinkers can do great damage. And they're hard to combat. It's not like they have tanks and columns that you just blow enough of them up and then you're rid of the problem. It doesn't work like that anymore. It doesn't work like that anymore. All it would take is one brainwashed individual convinced by some psychopathic brainwasher that they were actually doing the world a favor. All it would take is one such misguided soul, twisted thinker with a device strapped upon them and a timer and access to a WMD and a network of support to reap unthinkable horror. That's all it would take. So now I'm going to say what I know many of you will find the most provocative of all. But this is the thing that we've come to learn within the science of psychology. We have finally started to move away from this fear-based paradigm to a broader paradigm a broader paradigm that recognizes that what we should really be concerned about is how we behave, what we do to one another, what we do with one another, how we act, because that affects everything. And more importantly, that new psychology recognizes, and this is the key, that new psychology recognizes that what we think, the attitudes that we hold, the beliefs that we entertain about life, about others, and about the world around us, those kinds of cognitions profoundly predispose our actions. Now, that's not radical. What I'm about to say is radical and challenging. Most decent people want to maintain the ideal. They're idealistic, and they want to maintain this notion, they want to entertain this notion that everybody should be entitled to their beliefs. Well, everyone will have their beliefs. But I am here to say that not all beliefs, not all ways of believing are equal. There was a time. Some would say the time has not yet even passed fully. There was a time when many people believed that certain individuals of a particular culture or race were not of the same status as human beings and were not of the same value as human beings. And with that belief, they permitted themselves to enslave people and to think nothing of it. As a matter of fact, many folks who did it thought of themselves as benefactors to those poor souls who, if left to their own devices, would only be savages anyway. What I am saying is that what we believe matters, and not all ways of believing are equal. Now, I know that's challenging. And I know that opens the door to the thinking, well, whose way is the right way? And who's going to set up their way as the right way? Well, that's the honest discussion that the human race has to have. And what we really need to do, if we're ever going to solve the ideological warfare that threatens to take us down, is to challenge our systems of belief, and to challenge them openly and directly, benignly for sure, not with hatred, not with condemnation, not with prejudice. But we have to challenge each other, all of our systems of belief, all of our ways of thinking. If we don't get really honest with ourselves, about ourselves, we'll perish. If we don't challenge each other benignly, respectfully, but still directly, on the ways that we think about things, if we don't do that, will perish. I sincerely believe that. We have seen ideologies destroy before. It happens time and time and time again. The wars that we're seeing spawn right now in certain areas of the world are not born of dire need or dire scarcity of resources. That's not what's going on. It's not like an oppressed people are just struggling to survive and feel that their backs are against the wall and there's nothing to do but fight. That's not it. It's one group looking at another and saying about that other, you do not see things our way. You do not have the beliefs that we have. Our beliefs are valid and correct. Yours are evil. That makes us holy and you guilty. And as such, you don't merit existence. Now that's one heck of an ideology, folks. And it's hard to defeat an ideology. You don't defeat an ideology by putting missiles, cruise missiles on airplanes and blowing up buildings. That's not how you defeat an ideology. We're in for a really long, brutal, tragic battle. And it's the battle of ideas. It's the battle of a way of thinking that we face. And it's not going to be resolved anytime soon. And it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. We need to wake up. We need to wake up. We've been asleep way too long. And, you know, we have a tendency to think that none of this would be happening if it hadn't been for some misguided behaviors on the part of some of our leaders. And while there is a certain amount of truth to that, any reasonable study of history, any mindful look at the facts of history would tell you that just because some of our leaders have engaged in some really reckless, irresponsible behavior is not the reason. It's not the reason. It may have given pretext. It may have given some justification. But it is not the source of the problem. These ideologies have visited us before. They've always been around. There's always some crackpot group of folks with this twisted way of thinking. It's a remnant from our early evolutionary heritage. is part of our baser selves. It's been with us a long time. We are the only species that competes against one another. You know, we're up at the top of the food chain. The other species, it's live and let live, except for the fact that in order to live, each species has to prey on some of the species, quote unquote, below them within the evolution, within the food chain. And that's how it goes. We, however, unfortunately, still prey upon one another. We always have, but to survive, we will have to cease, because we've gotten pretty darn smart, and we've acquired the means to wipe ourselves out. And we're getting better at that all the time. What we believe matters. And these twisted ideologies that have been with us before and are with us again have to be confronted directly. It's the elephant in the room. This is the thing that I learned very early on in practice. I would go to many conferences, professional conference, and talk about elephant in the room. We would learn about all the kinds of things that you just basically couldn't deal with within traditional counseling. For example, someone's arrogance. The only way we had to explain it is that the person who showed haughtiness, the conjecture was, underneath it all, they must be afraid and insecure. They must have low self-esteem that they're compensating for. So therefore, what we have to do is we have to deal with their underlying insecurities and fears, and in a supportive, loving way, help them build a more solid, genuine sense of self, and then they won't act that way. This was the belief that we had. And you know, in some cases, in a few cases, it's actually true. What we didn't realize, and we've come to realize now, is that in far more cases, it's not true. And when someone is acting all that, it's because they really do think they're all that. And it's that twisted thinking in itself that is the problem. And if you don't touch it, if you don't confront it directly, if you don't face the elephant in the room and address it directly, things can get really bad. And so, in my early research, I actually started to confront the elephants in the room. When I would come across someone, or encounter someone in a therapeutic setting that was displaying this kind of behavior, and most especially the thinking that goes along with it. Egocentric thinking, self-centered thinking, thinking only of oneself and not about the welfare of others, thinking my way is better than your way, thinking my way or the highway, feelings of entitlement, feeling like because of my status or because of my wealth or because of my power, I ought to be able to do certain things. These feelings and these ways of thinking fueled this sense of superiority. And a certain amount of arrogance. And so I began to confront these things directly. It was unthinkable at the time. It was unthinkable for a therapist, for example, to be anything but supportive and to only 100% affirm a client in their feelings and in their beliefs. It was unthinkable to challenge those feelings or those beliefs. It was unthinkable to say to someone, for example, we think an awful lot of oneself, don't we? It was unthinkable. Not only that, if you were to share with a colleague that you actually said something like that to a client, your colleague would think you are the worst therapist on earth and would never send you a referral. That was the thinking. Times have changed. Thank goodness. And the perspective that we have today on how to deal with folks who have these twisted ways of thinking has changed for the better. But my point here is that it's the human condition, it's the human psyche that we have to make our most important frontier. Until we deal with ourselves and how we're made up, what makes us really tick, what really makes us tick, and how we can go so astray, especially in our thinking. Unless we deal with that, we're over. Now, I'm actually quite an optimist. I don't think we're over. I think that when you look at what appears to be kind of the grand design, I think we are actually creatures capable of doing some things that no other organisms are capable of doing. And that is ensuring the survival of life. Even if it means one day having to leave our mother planet that nurtured this life and finding somewhere else. You know, from a purely scientific standpoint, that's an inevitability. Why? Because the Earth is not going to be habitable forever. So if life is going to go on, if life is to continue, eventually it will have to be elsewhere. Now, we're talking millions of years here. But you know, eventually the sun is going to turn into a red giant. It's going to get so large that it consumes the inner planets, bathes the planets in heat that would be unbearable to life. The oceans will boil away. Life will be unsustainable. So, in order for life to even survive, we will have had to have figured out how to traverse great distances in reasonable lengths of time. We may have to even unlock the secrets to parallel universes. So many things. But to make a long story short, if we're going to survive, we have to figure these things out. So I'm an optimist. I think that the grand design is that we're meant to survive. But in order to get anywhere where we're going, we will have to understand ourselves and deal with ourselves better than we have. And our sciences have let us down on that score. Our so-called sciences of what it is to be human, whether it be anthropology, psychology, behavioral science, any of the sciences that look at human beings and what we're all about, they've kind of let us down. We're not looking hard enough. We're not looking objectively enough. We're not looking without prejudice. And we're not looking with a mindset that this is all about our future and our survival. And right now, the world faces a really serious challenge to its survival in the form of ideologies, and there's not just one. It's not just the Islamic extremists who believe that, this is just a small aside here, but I've been seeing these posts from one of the PR councils, the Public Relations Council of American Islam, putting out on Facebook and other places this message that the killing of innocents, the killing of innocent people, is forbidden under quote unquote true Islam. Well, here's the little loophole that the twisted thinkers use. And that is that no quote unquote infidel is innocent by definition. So if you're a non-believer, you're expendable anyway. You're not innocent, and it wouldn't be a violation of the rule to get rid of you. There's the little loophole. And that's not going to be broadcast very widely in any of these PR statements. So, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we haven't yet reached a point where we can have the honest, challenging, respectful conversation that we need to have about our systems of belief, all of which have the potential to bring us to an end. They also have the potential to help us survive. But not until we have the kind of dialogue that we've needed for a long, long time and still haven't had. I think at some point in the very near future, I'm going to have to hang up the work that I've been doing for the past 25 or 30 years and devote the rest of my time to an honest, challenging, I use that word respectfully, a respectful, challenging conversation about the belief systems that we have. An interfaith kind of dialogue like we've not seen before. Not one of just finding common ground, even though that's extremely important. Not just that, but one that actually challenges some of those tenets of faith, some of those beliefs that in their very nature only serve to divide, to alienate, and also serve as pretexts are too readily available as pretexts to do heinous things. Those ways of thinking, those beliefs, just like a disordered character who's in the therapy office and has made somebody's life miserable. Those twisted ways of thinking, those destructive ways of thinking and believing have to be challenged respectfully, honestly, benignly, without malice, but nonetheless directly challenged. We can't afford not to. We can't afford not to. There's too much at stake. So, my thoughts and my prayers are not only with the people of France, but with all the peoples of the earth. Who face this great challenge of our time. These ideologies, these systems of belief, these ways of thinking, these attitudes that threaten to destroy us all and must be addressed directly. We have to find a way. We're not going to bomb our way out of this. Besides, that only serves as fuel to the fire. I hope you agree. And even if you don't, maybe you can chime in next week. Tell me so. But I'll see you again next week on another edition of Character Matters. Thanks for tuning in. Dr. George Simon. See you next week.